các bạn, tụi mình là một trong những bạn nhỏ đầu tiên của phong trào Lisa for Change tại Việt Nam. Trong giai đoạn thấu cảm, một trong những nhiệm vụ tụi mình cần hoàn thành là hãy vẽ bản đồ đường từ trường về nhà của tụi mình. Một trong những điểm nóng mà bạn nào cũng có vẽ đó là rác dọc đường về nhà. Rác là một vấn nạn tại thành phố nơi tụi mình đang sống và tụi mình muốn bắt đầu làm gì đó. Mọi người biết không, rác thải nhựa mất từ 500 đến 1.000 năm, thậm chí hầu như không phân hủy vì trong bụng chứa đầy các mảnh nhựa. Theo các nhà khoa học, đến năm 2050 thì số lượng bịch ni lông nhiều hơn cả số cá ở trong biển. Tụi mình còn có cơ hội tham gia chuyến tham quan khu xử lý rác thải Đa Phước, khu xử lý rác lớn nhất ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. Tụi mình được biết rằng có khoảng hơn 6.000 tấn rác được thải ra mỗi ngày ở thành phố nơi tụi mình sống, và phương pháp được sử dụng để xử lý đó là chôn cất. Rác ở đó đã trở thành một đống rất cao. Tụi mình đã về và cùng nhau tìm xem có cách gì tụi mình có thể làm để cứu lấy người bạn thiên nhiên yêu dấu hay không. Tụi mình đã thử làm các đồ sử dụng các vật liệu tái chế. Tụi mình đã làm infographic để mọi người biết rằng mất bao lâu thì một số rác thải thông thường mới phân hủy được. Tụi mình còn cùng nhau xây dựng thêm một trang web selfthebodinature.weebly.com để cung cấp thêm thông tin về cách tái chế rác cho mọi người và các sản phẩm có thể thay thế nhựa. Tiệm bánh khác nhau kêu gọi các cô chú giám đốc ở đó hãy thay thế những đồ nhựa sử dụng một lần thành những vật liệu hơn thân thiện với môi trường và dùng ly thủy tinh hoặc sứ để phục vụ cho khách tại cửa hàng. Và sau hơn 2 tuần chờ đợi, tụi mình rất vui mừng nhận được bức thư phản hồi đầu tiên từ cửa hàng bánh Grand Castella. Cô Ngọc Ánh, giám đốc marketing ở đó cho biết họ rất vui và cảm ơn ý kiến của tụi mình và sẽ áp dụng ở tất cả các chi nhánh tại thành phố Hồ Chí Minh và Hà Nội. Họ sẽ hỏi người mua xem liệu có cần dao nhựa khi mua bánh không, và trong tương lai không xa họ cũng sẽ thay thế dao nhựa thành da làm bằng vật liệu thân thiện hơn với môi trường. Tụi mình vẫn đang chờ đợi phản hồi từ những nơi khác cùng bắt tay với tụi mình để bảo vệ lấy người bạn thiên nhiên.
Dạ chậm đây mà.
His name is Gordon. He's my father. He was a soldier. While he was a prisoner of war, it was hell. He didn't believe there was goodness in the world anymore. And when the war ended, he changed. His faith returned. He dedicated his life to help other people. And on the day he died, he asked me to come and find the person who changed him. What did you say to him?
Oh. 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 เขาจะได้อะไรถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวันเขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลยไม่ได้รวยขึ้นไม่ได้ออกทีวีไม่มีใครรู้จักไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้นเพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุขได้เข้าใจได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุด
가려고 있는데 왜
Show chalu phi la mala chap su cha hele ra chap su cha chap su cha
I'd like to share some of my experiences today, a little bit of my story actually that took me from the UN to Bhutan, and I'd like us to take a bit of a global perspective. The last day's meetings were fascinating for me. A lot of the science and the neuroscience on mindfulness and compassion, and a lot of it focusing on the individual and how we can make healthier, more compassionate individuals. Today, I want us to reflect a little bit on the bigger picture, for example, the economy. How does that create the conditions for compassionate individuals? We often think of the economy as something that's unchangeable, it's kind of fixed, but in fact, we create the values which create our economy. And Bhutan's doing some really interesting work in questioning what are those values and how can the economy shape a more compassionate society. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own story, because I like stories as a way of getting people engaged. I'll talk a bit about the global picture, particularly the work that I've been doing in the United Nations. I'll talk a little bit about the political aspects. You may be surprised to learn that happiness and well-being could be a political issue when it's linked to the economy. And then I'll reflect a bit on some experience, because it's all well and fine to talk about this in theory, but what are people actually doing to create happiness on a global scale? And finally, I'll share some of my thoughts around vision, because I think it's always important for us to try and project forward and really think about the kind of world that we'd like to be living in and that we'd like to see our children growing up in. So to start with my own story, that's me in the center in Bhutan. But before I was there, I started out working on HIV/AIDS as a medical doctor. I was trained in Canada. And I was a little bit concerned that my clinical skills were not really making much of a difference in the HIV epidemic. I was working during my residency in Springfield, Massachusetts, where there were a lot of social conditions that I started to notice were playing a big role in the epidemic. The poverty that I was seeing, the domestic violence, the drug addiction. This was prior to the time of antiretrovirals, and it really made me question what is actually driving health beyond the individual's biology. So that took me to South Africa, and you'll see some kids there playing in a small rural village in northern part of the country. And I was in a rural area, and I have to tell you, it was kind of a shock to my system to be in a community that was so poor. So there was very little running water. Electricity had only recently come to this village. And I was doing surveys at the household level to find out what was happening in people's homes that were putting them at risk of HIV. And not surprisingly, poverty was a big issue there. So I can remember going into these homes and asking some pretty personal questions, such as, when was the last time you had a meal, and what were you eating, and have the children gone without food for the last couple of days? And a lot of times the answer to that was yes. So you can imagine my surprise when, after doing a survey like that, the head of the household, who was usually a single mom, would invite me to stay and to have lunch or tea with them and to share what little food she had with me, a complete stranger coming in to do a survey. So I was really struck by this contrast between material poverty and spiritual wealth. I was really touched by the way that they brought me into their homes in the midst of this really abject poverty. At the same time, I started doing my Masters of Public Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and that's the scene on the right, where I would go to the university on the subway, which we call the Tube, and I was struck by those faces that you'll see there. Nobody was actually making eye contact. Nobody was talking to each other, and if you tried to strike up a conversation, people would look at you as if you were strange. And again, it made me contrast, what is it about the sort of friendliness and openness I was seeing in rural South Africa and the kind of sense of social isolation I was picking up in London? Fast forward to the United Nations in Manhattan, that's Times Square there, which most of you will recognize. And at that time, I was invited to a meeting on happiness and well-being, which I will tell you about shortly, and asked to join an expert working group in Bhutan that was putting together a report to the UN. And I started bouncing back and forth between Manhattan and Bhutan, which is on the right. And again, the contrast between the wealth and the prosperity of New York and what Bhutan is still considered a developing country really, again, highlighted what are the differences between material development and social development that we should be thinking about. So it provoked a lot of questions for me. First of all, what is development? Is there such a thing as overdevelopment? We talk about underdevelopment, but is it possible that in some countries we've overshot the mark in terms of happiness? And it made me ask, where have I been happiest in my life and why? So it's interesting that these questions have started being asked on the global level as well. And I think part of that is because we've been seeing wave after wave of social unrest spreading through the country. You only have to pick up the newspaper to see that in all of these countries, a lot of people, particularly young people, are beginning to protest against the conditions that they see themselves in. They're witness to these widening inequalities between the rich and the poor, and a sense of disillusionment that their governments do not actually have their interests at heart. So there's a deep wish for profound social change that is again asking this question about what is development. We're also facing a deep environmental crisis, and that won't be news to many of you in the room. And a lot of this is being driven by our current model of limitless growth, the idea that we can use up the Earth's finite resources to satisfy what is really unlimited wants rather than needs. And we're seeing the resulting social and ecological and economic crises that are unfolding. A lot of our solutions have been focusing on just Band-Aid solutions, just technical ways to fix the problem, rather than asking what is driving the problem. At the meeting in Bhutan recently, some of the members of the working group noted that one of the crises, one of the drivers of this may be our inability to have compassion for our future, and that's an interesting way to think about it. The way they put it, this is Paul and Anne Ehrlich, was to ask the question, can we care enough to take on the cost of changing our own behavior now, whether that's the kind of transportation that we use or our reliance on petrol, knowing that it will largely benefit unknown strangers in the future. So that's a really interesting idea about compassion, not just for yourself or for the other, but for generations that you may never meet. And all of this is having really grave consequences. The World Bank recently released their report, Turn Down the Heat, which stated that a 4 degrees Celsius warmer world can and must be avoided, and we have to hold it below 2 degrees Celsius. But we are on this path to a 4 degrees centigrade temperature rise. And you may ask, 4 degrees, what is the difference? Why should that matter? That 4 degrees will have potentially devastating consequences for our planet. Extreme heat waves, rising sea levels, worsening food and water scarcity, and then the large-scale social displacement. We will see climate change refugees as people move from country to country trying to secure resources for themselves and their children. And no part of the world is going to be immune, but as usually, the poorest parts of the world will be the hardest hit. So what does this mean for us in terms of our decision makers? I think on the political level, we're also starting to ask what is true development. And we're finding the latest research showing that wealthier countries are not necessarily happier. And that's challenging a lot of our development assumptions. Now, it's true that wealth contributes substantially to our life satisfaction, but only up to a point. Above a certain safety net, there are diminishing returns on our happiness. So it makes sense that we need to have a roof over our heads, education, food on our plates. But beyond that, incremental rises in our income do not lead to incremental rises in our happiness. The United States is, in fact, one of the richest economies in the world, but ranks only 17th in terms of life satisfaction in global surveys. And that's behind countries that are much poorer, such as Costa Rica. So if it's not just money and not wealth and not GDP that relates to a country's sense of happiness, what does? It's actually things like community trust, feeling like you're in a community where you know your neighbors and you can trust them, a sense that you can trust your government to make good decisions, work that is meaningful and not just drudgery, and that is secure. It's not just part-time. You don't feel like you're going to be displaced as soon as a computer comes along. And work-life balance. All these things are more important in surveys for our personal happiness than just additional income. There's a fascinating book, if people are interested in learning about this, called The Spirit Level, and both of the authors were part of this expert working group that I was a part of in Bhutan. And one of the fascinating graphs that they present in that book is looking at the impact of inequality on rich countries, and that's the graph that you see here. On the bottom axis is income inequality, which is measured by something called the Gini coefficient. And on the vertical axis, you see countries that rank worse in terms of social problems or better. And that's a composite index. The social problems include things like life expectancy, literacy levels, how much homicide there is in that country, how many people are in prison, mental illness, drug and alcohol addiction. So what do you see when you put those things on the graph? The more unequal countries, the more unequal wealthy countries, and that's the United States is up there at the top, the worse the level of these social problems that you see in the countries. The more equal countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, you see on that axis there, the less social problems you see. So again, inequality harms the rich as well as the poor. So that's a lot of the background to why the United Nations invited Bhutan to come to New York and to present GNH. And it comes at a time when a lot of leaders were questioning what we measure in terms of GDP. The Nobel Prize winner Amartya Sen was part of a group of economists, along with Joseph Stiglitz, who put together a report called Mismeasuring Our Lives, and really questioned why GDP is being used to measure the progress and state of a country. It led Ban Ki-moon to also comment on this, and I'm going to show a short video clip that talks about and questions GDP. You may be surprised to see that this video clip does not date from this year or last year. It dates from 1968, and it's prophetic words from none other than Senator Robert Kennedy.
Too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community value in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product now is over $800 billion a year. But that gross national product, if we judge the United States of America by that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwoods and the loss of our natural wonder in chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm, and it counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifle and Speck's knife and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America, except why we are proud that we are Americans.
So it measures everything except that which makes life worth living. So if there's an oil spill, the cost of that oil spill and the cost of cleaning it up will make GDP go up. So that's not a clear indication of how well a country is doing. Bhutan presented these ideas at the UN 2 years ago, and it led to this report that was put out by the government of Bhutan with the working group. And I'll share a few of the findings from that report that I think are relevant to the United States and to all of us in this room. So Bhutan's gross national happiness is a way of measuring progress that's in distinction to GDP. It's really holistic and multidimensional. It's really recognizing interdependence between a lot of things, including material wealth, and the things that actually do count towards making us happy. I'll show you some of those domains. It includes the things that you would expect, like health and education and living standards, but also interesting things like time use, ecological diversity, community vitality. Some of the things that I mentioned earlier in surveys really indicate how people feel in terms of their well-being. This isn't to say that Bhutan has all the answers or that it's figured it all out. If you come to Bhutan, the leaders will say very humbly, we're a living experiment. We're trying it out. We're trying to do something different. They're also experiencing the materials temptations that are here in the West: television, advertising, internet, tourism are increasingly expanding in Bhutan. And they also say we're connected to the rest of the world. We can't be a G&H bubble in a GDP world. Time use is fascinating because it's one of those measures that across national surveys, people link as being really important to their sense of well-being. In time use surveys, lack of leisure time, people complain that they don't feel they have a chance to spend time with their kids, and it leads to a real sense of not being well. This is one of my favorite photos, and it shows, it's by Louis Daguerre, and it's in the 1800s. It's the first photograph of a human being that was taken in the world. Can anybody see that person? Someone's pointing there. One human being in Paris in the 1800s. Why is there nobody else around? Was it the plague? Any ideas? Thank you. It took 10 minutes for this exposure to capture this one human being. And the reason there's only one person there is he was the only one standing there long enough to be captured in the photograph. He was having his shoes shined. And so I think that's a really powerful metaphor for what actually lasts in this busy, fast-paced world that we're moving in. Free time that we do have is increasingly devoted to television. A kind of shocking figure from the Kaiser Family Foundation is that children ages 8 to 18 spend 8.5 hours a day watching TV or using digital devices. Now that's more time than they spend on any activity besides sleeping. When I looked into the pediatrics literature on this to find out what is the impact of television, It's associated with the things that you would expect: less exercise, higher obesity, but also things like fewer social ties, low concentration, a higher sense of materialism, more fear of death, probably from the violence, and a sense of social comparison, constantly comparing yourselves with others. I think it's also amazing that in the past decade, the use of prescription drugs to treat ADHD in children has increased by 46% in the US, and it's quadrupled in the UK. So something to think about in terms of how we're using our time. In terms of community vitality, from a G&H perspective, trust, safety, connectedness is measured in the G&H surveys. And it's really amazing that in many communities we're seeing, because of these widening social inequalities, a real breakdown of social cohesion and trust. And I know many of us were really saddened by the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School that made many people in the country wonder what is going on with our communities. Psychological well-being is also measured in the G&H survey. Depression now ranks as the first contributor to the burden of disease in wealthy countries. It's not coronary artery disease, it's not car accidents, it's depression. And a lot of people are asking, what is the role of the media and advertising in driving what we're calling the distracted society? In Bhutan, there's been strong limitations on public advertising in the country, and the capacity for happiness is seen as something which can be cultivated. And we heard yesterday how the latest neuroscientific research is really supporting the idea that we can train our minds to be more content, more mindful. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about vision. So what do we do with this understanding of happiness and well-being? With the G&H Center, who I'm working with in Bhutan, we have started a series of labs where we bring leaders from around the world, including from the United States, to Bhutan to learn about G&H and to see how they can apply it in their own countries. And I'm going to show a video clip that will illustrate some of the findings from that.
One of the key dimensions of how the old economy works is the orientation and fixation to improving GDP, although we know from statistics that more GDP does not translate in developed countries to more well-being.
Beyond GDP, to some extent, conveys the idea that material development is important up to a point, but beyond that point, we need to look at other indicators and other measures of well-being.
Well, I think it's really talking about changing our economy from something that serves just a few to something that serves the many.
Being able to have these discussions about the challenges between happiness and progress and prosperity, I think that'll be really, really helpful.
I'm excited to work with other people around the idea of what's a better way to do business.
The Global Wellbeing and G&H Lab is a project in which we're working with an international group of 25 participants who've been selected because they're all in some way working on global well-being. And what we're doing is taking them together to really interesting, high potential areas for innovation, such as Brazil and Bhutan, and giving them a lot of support and space for them to reflect and then prototype, innovate new projects and new ideas when they go back home.
If this is a tiny little microcosm of how to do things differently, I think that will be a hell of a spark for the future.
What the lab is trying to do is say, let's take people out of their normal environment, their comfort zones, take them to places where they can be inspired or challenged or provoked, where they can connect with like-minded people, and where they can see things in a way that they haven't before. A lot of the first part of the journey is about sensing, taking in what's out there, not coming there with your answers, with your preconceived notion of what you're going to see and go, aha, okay, check, 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 that's what I expected. But rather to really go there with an open mind.
We took our time to be in the community, to walk around, to engage with very different levels of the community, from the police to local inhabitants to civil society people who were trying to bring about change.
What was surprising was the inspiration. So we saw entrepreneurs, we saw a community that was trying to deal with gang violence and crime and come up with unconventional solutions to that. So we experienced the urbanization, the tensions in these very unequal societies, and then we radically and very quickly moved into the Amazon. We had amazing conversations there where people were able to share the kind of work that they were doing and what they were hoping to see come out of the lab.
We have to have the corporate social responsibility trying to change the system from within, while we have people creating different models that drive the market to say, we're going to choose that if you guys don't change.
When we stepped off the boat, we got to meet people in communities that were working to really live in balance with nature and engage with the modern world in a way that preserved their values and their indigenous knowledge.
Being with the communities that lived on the river, the sense of deep and profound relationship between people and nature was very important to see. Both the ability to work with the natural environment to produce goods or to sustain livelihoods, but also the sense of how that held community ways of being that seemed to be essentially sustainable. An appreciation started to emerge about what makes a community that is well. Money per se, we found, was not the primary driver for happiness and well-being.
A lot of our sessions in the mornings involved people sitting with a practice of mindfulness or meditation, just to resist the urge to constantly fill the space up with ideas and thoughts.
Mindfulness is about reclaiming the power of our attention and directing it intentionally so that our attention is aligned with our intentions. What we measure is what we are attentive to, therefore the importance of the indicators. If we shift what we measure, we become aware and attentive to other things, and therefore there can be a system shift.
I think for a lot of people, just being taken to some really challenging and also inspiring parts of Brazil opened up their thinking about their own work in a way that they hadn't anticipated. To come back with fresh perspective and with maybe some courage and some inspiration to do something differently. And I think that's what we started to see happening in Brazil.
There are many attempts to develop new ways to measure progress and development, but the only country in the world who's trying to do it on a country-wide level is Bhutan. It's a unique opportunity to observe what are the challenges, what works, what doesn't work. So in a way, although it's a very small country, what's happening here is very important because it is some kind of an experiment the rest of the world can learn from.
Within Bhutan, the government has really been promoting gross national happiness as a way of measuring how the country is doing, not just in relation to economic growth, which is what GDP would reflect, but how the nation as a whole is doing in terms of well-being and happiness. The second half of the lab brought all the participants to Bhutan for a deep immersion experience in GNH. So we started off with a welcoming and a ceremonial tree planting, and we were really lucky to have Her Royal Highness Ashi Khedsang Wangchuk to open and welcome us here.
Bhutan seeks to balance equitable and sustainable economic development with environmental conservation, cultural promotion, and good governance. This is why we welcome the opportunity to work with distinguished global leaders and thinkers such as you.
We then had a series of speakers from the government and policy level.
When the Prime Minister talks about Bhutan's leadership role in developing this new economic paradigm or new development paradigm, he very often uses the term, he says, it has a purpose, and its purpose is human happiness and the well-being of all life forms.
We have trained all our school leaders and deputy school leaders in infusing ideas of gross national happiness into the overall life of the school.
Then it was going to the field and visiting a number of institutions, civil society organizations, to see the way it's implemented on the ground level.
We opted to reduce plastic waste by refusing to eat packaged food on all days except Wednesday.
We had been exposed more to the outer side of GNH, policy making and its implementation in the country. And now we wanted to encourage the participant to reflect what does it mean for them personally in terms of values, in terms of life's purpose, meaning. So we organized this walking pilgrimage to Tiger's Nest, which is one of the sacred places in Bhutan. The pilgrimage is always at the same time an outer journey to a physical place in space, but always also an inner journey.
Find that spot that'll be a little off the path where you can be without walking and panting, but where you can actually be and settle.
That question of inner transformation, I think, is central to the journey of this lab, to really understand what is it that we need to shift in ourselves, how do we model that or inspire it for others, and then how can that become a movement for social change. One of the explicit goals of the Global Wellbeing and GNH Lab is to create living examples of how we can actually model this change in the world. And that's based on the idea that we need to prototype, we need to try out new things, revise them, go back to the drawing board, and then start to see how they can be scaled up.
Prototyping ideas may be an advancement of a piece of work that we are already doing. For others, it's taking an idea that we had already and move them into action in order to use them as an instrument for institutional and system-wide transformation.
This isn't built on GDP, it's an absolutely stark challenge to GDP.
This is actually proving that GDP doesn't work for the people.
We want to specifically focus on the business engagement because it's been really missing from our work so far.
Our prototype is essentially to engage business leaders with this purpose, to change the way we frame and conduct our economy from us versus them to a business value proposition which builds community by better serving society and nature and engaging the creativity and potential of all citizens.
A number of exciting projects have come out of this lab. They're early seeds, they'll need to be fertilized and watered and looked after, but they're quite creative and they've brought together new partnerships to really deal with these issues in a new way.
On the last day, it felt like as if we were playing a symphony together and all these different instruments had come in a certain harmony.
We have really come to some concrete ideas for how to ground going beyond GDP in real practical projects.
All these leaders and change agents go back to Brazil, the US, India, wherever they are situated, and there they work and do action with what they have come up with in the lab and in the process so far.
It's given me a sense of strength, a sense of motivation to keep going forward, and most excitingly, it's given me this amazing new network of wonderful friends and colleagues and peers who I'm really looking forward to working with in the future.
It's made me realize that true system transformation really starts with individuals, that the ability to transform the economy or transform our healthcare system ultimately depends on the ability and willingness of the individuals within the system to transform themselves.
I still feel that from this lab, we human beings, we still have a hope for the future. That is what I came to know.
So finally, in Bhutan, we're also looking at education and how it can build a more compassionate society. Earlier views of education, you may be surprised to learn, grew out of monasteries and cathedral schools, where actually contemplative practices, moral instruction, and liberal arts were all seen as part of a holistic education. And yet, in this country and elsewhere, we're seeing a shifting emphasis on the hard sciences. We're dropping arts, ethics, human values, and we're increasingly focusing on test scores and competition to get students ready for the global market economy. So there's more pressure on students, more pressure on teachers and administrators. So the G&H Center is collaborating with the Mind and Life Institute of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to bring together the latest research and come up with curricula for students that will focus on social and emotional learning. And the real question there is, can we refocus education to serve society and planet instead of the market? Bhutan and Vietnam are two countries that the G&H Center will be supporting to do this work. So finally, I just want to share a few ideas about how do we make the world we want actually manifest in reality, and can it be as simple as starting with a shift in perspective? I love these two quotes, one from Albert Einstein and one from the Buddha, that seem to reflect from very different time periods the power of our minds. Einstein said, "The world as we have created it is a process of our own thinking. It can't be changed without changing our thinking." And the Buddha said in 500 BC, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." We have a tendency to focus on what is visible and what is outside ourselves, but what about the importance of inner transformation? And can these ever be separate? The former Prime Minister of Bhutan is now the chairman of the G&H Center, and the task he gave to us is to bring up graduates who will be truly transformative, genuine human beings realizing their full and true potential, caring for others, including other species, ecologically literate, contemplative as well as analytical in their understanding of the world, appreciating completely that they are not separate from the natural world and from others, in some manifesting their humanity fully. So what would it look like if that was the goal of our education system? I'll close with a final short clip that I think shows something about the power of just transforming
I am
our
part of a
perspective.
lost generation, and I refuse to believe that I can change the world. I realize this may be a shock, but happiness comes from within is a lie, and money will make me happy. So in 30 years, I will tell my children they are not the most important thing in my life. My employer will know that I have my priorities straight because work is more important than family. I tell you this, once upon a time, families stayed together. But this will not be true in my era. This is a quick fix society. Experts tell me 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. I do not concede that I will live in a country of my own making. In the future, environmental destruction will be the norm. No longer can it be said that my peers and I care about this earth. It will be evident that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It is foolish to presume that there is hope. And all of this will come true unless we choose to reverse it. There is hope. It is foolish to presume that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It will be evident that my peers and I care about this earth. No longer can it be said that environmental destruction will be the norm. In the future, I will live in a country of my own making. I do not concede that 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. Experts tell me this is a quick fix society, but this will not be true in my era. Families stayed together once upon a time. I tell you this, family is more important than work. I have my priorities straight because my employer will know that they are not the most important thing in my life. So in 30 years, I will tell my children, money will make me happy is a lie, and true happiness comes from within. I realize this may be a shock, but I can change the world, and I refuse to believe that I am part of a lost generation.
Thank you very much.
길 가브라와네 데키 핀 좀조 가진 힐레체
가진 힐레상 두기 진을쳐 구세리 월쇼 구세리 월쇼
Start. Yes?
Okay. Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Sierra Hanks from Atherton High School, and I'd like to discuss compassion with all of you. I've noticed a rather troubling modern movement to look down on compassion, to call compassionate people naive, or to resign the word to the bleeding hearts who we then toss away as idealistic. We're old enough. We've seen the atrocious things people do to each other. It seems so much safer to be a cynic. To believe in human compassion makes us feel like foolish children. It scares us. And how terrible that empathy is seen as childish, while cynicism seems the safer path. At times, I must admit, I too have hardened my heart in protection. But I still believe in a compassionate future for our world. And that future begins with all of us. We aren't foolish for caring. We're human. And compassion is part of being human. Buddhists and Jews attribute this to the singularity or oneness of our existence. Christians have a compassionate example in Jesus. Muslims learn through the fasting of Ramadan to empathize with the often constant hunger pangs of others. But beyond that, at the biological human level, we are compassionate. Scientists have found through the study of oxytocin in the brain that we're hardwired to be. In respect to context, there's a common misconception that since Buddhism accepts that in reality there is suffering and isolation aids in the reaching of enlightenment, that Buddhism doesn't promote interpersonal compassion. I've found this to be false. In traditional and modern Buddhist thought, the only thing higher than pursuing one's own enlightenment is helping another on their path to enlightenment. It can be simply said that shared suffering is lessened, while shared joy increased. And so, this is my challenge to you, my friends. Don't be ashamed of being compassionate. Strive to help others reach their full potential on your path to realizing your own. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Can I give you a hug?
Hmm?
Can I give you a hug?
Thank you. Correct. I think I prefer.
There's another one.
Talk by stand. I appreciate your also the comment. Excellent. It is very true. Sometimes people, firstly, the concept sort of warm-heartedness or compassion, forgiveness, you see, these things consider part of religious practice. So those people who have not much interest about religion even you see those people who supposed to believer, but not seriously implement what they believe, then you see these usually you see neglect about practice of these things. So these, of course, all religious tradition carry the practice of these things and also use philosophical sort of, how to say, backing. However, these things are actually, biologically, we need these things. Firstly, we're born from our mother. At the initial sort of few years, we can't stand it, or we can't sort of look after oneself. Entirely depend on others' affection or others' sort of care. Even animals like that. So mentally, emotionally, we equipped by biological factor. This is some kind of cherishing way, or love, or affection. So that's our way, our life starts that way. I think here, you see those children who received, I think, the maximum affection from their mother. I think today, such people, deep inside, more sort of strength, more self-confidence, and ready to show affection to others than those people who receive less affection from our mother or from our friend. And sometimes neglect child, just give food, nothing. Such people who experience in early period that kind of thing, or worst thing, bully, abuse. Then these people, no matter how successful, but in deep inside, some sense of insecurity, sense of fear. That automatically brings some kind of distrust to other people. Very difficult to find trusted friend. Finally, become lonely person, lonely way, in mental level, lonely. And then depression. Then their best sort of friend is alcohol or drug. Since nobody they can trust. So only perhaps I think some pets, dogs, or cats. And then the bottle of alcohol. And eventually ruined their own physical. Very clear. So therefore, we should not consider these values as something religious sort of values who have no interest about religion because of the neglect about these things is totally wrong. Then, another thing, practice compassion is good for practitioner himself or herself, but not necessarily, you see, helping other. That also great mistake. I think firstly, my own sort of story. My mother, farmer, illiterate, uneducated, poor sort of the mother of the farming sort of family. But very warm-hearted person. So when I was young, I was the youngest child. So I received, at that time, I received maximum sort of what's the affection from my mother. Perhaps some of my elder brothers, sisters may have some jealousy, maybe. So in any way, so dear to me, my mother, very kind. And then myself also is very, very dear, my mother. So as is a villagers sort of children, child, no sort of toys or these things. Of course, video games, these things, not there. So daytime, I carry by my mother on her shoulder, and when she sort of farming work in farm land, you see, she worked that way. She always carried me. So then, when go different places, and I hold, you see, my mother's 2 ear. I want to go this side, I do this. If I want to go this side, go like that. If my mother didn't listen my wish, then I shout, and then bang bang bang, my leg, kick on my mother like that. So I'm quite sure. Later, through training, the training about compassion, these things, I found very easy, because I feel the real seed of compassion cultivated by my mother. Clear. So these are biological facts. Clear. That's one thing. Then the practitioner, of course, as soon as sort of the inner sort of warm feeling here, mainly, sorry. You should say, God bless. Sometimes in the room, air conditioned, sometimes you see bad for a nose like that. So of course, the practitioner himself, herself, you see, as soon as some kind of warm feeling of other and concern of others' well-being there, that automatically reduce the desire to harming other, or desire to exploit other, desire to cheating other, because you respect them. You actually voluntarily take concern of their well-being. As a result, your trust with respect automatically comes. So that brings inner strength, self-confidence, reduced fear. Such practitioner, no possible loneliness feeling, rest of community. I always telling 7 billion human beings are actually human brothers, sisters. I always telling people, I myself also practice oneness of humanity. So everywhere, new place, it's the first time meeting, but I feel, another human being. No differences. So with that kind of attitude, I myself used to get immense benefit. And then others also. See, obviously, others also human beings. If you show them sincere feeling, honest, open, they also, even I met a number of cases, some people initially a little bit reserved, remain a little bit distant. And I always see dealing these people as a human brothers, sisters. No formality, no sort of distance feeling. So within a few minutes, then their attitude also change. So result, they also become much happier. So that's the way to create happy community, happy family. So once individual seriously sort of carry these sort of positive value, then it automatically create different sort of friendly atmosphere within the family, within the community. So therefore, as a result of, because of one individual practice, it certainly, you see, eventually get benefit to others also. Then, it is true. There's some people who just think about money without thinking this inner value, without knowing the inner peace, then more aggressive, more tough person. Sometimes we feel, oh, very able person, compassionate, consider weak. This is totally wrong. Actually, person who practice compassion, practice forgiveness, is actually much more inner strength. People who act aggressively and anger is the sign of weakness. When how anger develops? Feel some threat. You feel some anxiety, so the sense of yourself weak. So then it seems some threat. Then anger comes. And then aggressive sort of, violent sort of attitude comes. So that's totally sign of weakness. I think a true person, when we have some kind of argument, heated argument, the one person who have plenty of reason, usually less possible to develop anger. The other person who have not much sort of sound basis about his or her argument, then sometimes you see easier develop anger like that. So compassion is sign of strength. Anger is signs of weakness. Then here you see you have to make a distinction. Affection to the person. Now here we are talking is not compassion or affection on purely biological factor. That is seed of our compassion. But then use our intelligence, then further strengthening that compassion. Now here is the two differences. The first level of compassion, of affection, out of sort of biological factor, that's very much oriented about other sort of action, other appearances. When I look at you, inspired my smile, or sort of a serious sort of attitude, if you still look like that, then you see the biological factor of compassion, then much depend on others' attitude, others' appearances. There are some difficulties. But the second level of compassion further developed with help of human intelligence. Then, if the other one looks a little sort of negative attitude, but won't change you see, your compassionate attitude, because that trained compassion, compassion based on reason, that compassion not oriented others' attitude or appearances, but oriented the being himself or herself. So now, enemy, as far as the attitude is concerned, negative to you. But still, they are basically human beings. They also, like ourselves, want happy life. And they also have every right to overcome suffering, including overcome anger. Anger means some kind of suffering of emotion. So therefore, on that level, on human level, you see, even your sort of compassionate feeling or sense of concern is even increasing towards enemy. You see, they also, you see, same human being, do not want suffering, but they become slave of anger. As a result, they not only harming other people, but also, you see, lose their own peace of mind. So we have sufficient reasons to feel concerned about them. So now here, two levels. Affection, mainly based on other attitude, or sense of concern, not on that, but being because of himself or herself, personal level. So now here, make distinction. Action and actor. Now, actor is concerned as a human brothers, sisters. You must keep affection, compassion. Now, action is concerned, if the circumstances is such it's necessary to take countermeasure, then take countermeasure out of sense of concern on their well-being, long run. So then appropriate sort of measure to stop their wrongdoing. Clear. So, and then the countermeasure take while your mind is very clear, no sort of calm, no sort of agitated mind, then your countermeasure may become more effective. Person who lost, person who take countermeasure, himself or herself also lost temper, lose temper. And then anger comes. The best part of our brain, which can judge right and wrong, that will not function properly because too much anger really biased our mind. So biased mind will not see objectively about the reality. So therefore, certain countermeasure take during your mind too much agitated, then this countermeasure, I think even government level, sometimes it happens. So certain sort of measure, maybe it's a very good motivation or very good sort of goal, but they, you see, when they take it, when they decide this such a policy, a little bit, I say, negative emotion. So often goes wrong. Unexpected negative consequences happen. Because at the moment the decision take, their mind a little bit biased. So you see, cannot see the things objectively. So therefore, even if it's a strong countermeasure, so try to bring court, or eventually some kind of that sentence I feel too extreme, but lifelong sort of prison sentence. I think if necessary, you see, we can approach it that way, but realistically, calmly. So countermeasure without anger, more compassionate attitude, countermeasure may become more effective. And certainly, the appropriate countermeasure with sense of genuine concern of their well-being, troublemakers' well-being, I think more people support you. Clear? I think honest lawyer definitely support that, isn't it? If lawyer himself, herself, a little bit so different, then only money or political pressure, that's something different. So therefore, you see, now here, you see, you should not think compassionate person or compassion is signs of weakness. You should not think that. Then secondly, see, you practice sort of compassion, then you will be loser because more people take advantage. No. You see, you look the situation. If someone take advantage on you unjustly, you can take because a firm stand without losing anger. Clear? That's actually the very sort of powerful practice of forgiveness. In spite of their wrongdoing, not lose anger, hatred. But according to the reality, if appropriate countermeasure necessary, take the countermeasure without losing compassion about that person. Clear? Like that, then come to order. Oh, so that's more or less answer for your sort of comment. Okay. Do you agree?
Do you agree?
So now some further questions.